Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful conference. It's a pleasure to be in Croatia, now a loyal NATO ally of my country, and I hope very soon a member of the EU. A word at the beginning, word of explanation. Mr. Lopez Asturias was saying there was no flag. The organizers quite properly recognized that after 20 years in serving the U.S. government, I am now a free private citizen, so I don't deserve the flag, but perhaps I can compensate for that by being a little bit less diplomatic than I would have been earlier. I also understand that I'm standing between everyone and the next coffee break, and even though too much caffeine is not good for the health, I will still attempt ruthlessly to condense my remarks to fit them into 5 minutes. Very quickly, the description of this session in our agenda began with European security architecture, and as everyone knows, this is currently being thrashed about in the OSCE's Corfu process. And it was mentioned by several panelists that Russia has been dissatisfied with the current structures that clearly must be addressed. We understand that Russia's December 2009 draft treaty will be responded to in time. I think it's fair to say, though, to be completely candid, that its 2 key points are dead on arrival, namely subordinating NATO to a new body, and secondly, being in the form of a legally binding treaty. This certainly is not going to happen while Russia is currently in violation of several of its legally binding commitments. Rather than changing existing structures, as Minister Adamovicius had said, we should work together in the spirit of the reset, together with Russia, to confront the new security challenges of the 21st century, most of which are transnational in character. Other panelists have mentioned most of them: terrorism, energy cutoffs, environmental problems, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, biological warfare, threats to cybersecurity, and organized international crime, including trafficking in drugs, persons, and weapons. Lord Anderson mentioned the population decline as a serious threat. I agree. I would, however, say that of the major post-industrial countries in the world, post-industrial democracies in the world, mine is the only one that has and will continue to have a population increase, both indigenous and because of our immigration policies. I'd also like to say that it would be excellent for security in Europe, and I think this will happen, that we add to the competencies of the NATO-Russia Council. Secretary General Boucher has mentioned the NATO strategic concept. I have a lot written on that. I'm not going to talk about it. Perfectly correct. New threats, new tools. The group of experts report, I thought, was, as a first step, quite a professional job. I would have liked to have seen more on the current largest challenge to the alliance, namely Afghanistan, especially on eliminating national caveats, but we'll see what happens in December. The important thing is that it reiterated the main thrust of NATO, the Article 5 grounded comprehensive collective defense and expeditionary capability. I don't want to fail to mention Iran as an absolutely very, very, very important security challenge, but to discuss that adequately would require a whole new conference, which we're not about to do. NATO enlargement, contrary to beliefs in many quarters because of our having put the candidacies of Ukraine and Georgia more or less on the back burner, NATO enlargement is definitely not on hold. I expect that when the Macedonian name issue is settled, and for heaven's sake, let me be non-diplomatic, this should have been settled 15 years ago. Let's get it settled quickly. Macedonia will join the alliance, and I might say that Montenegro, which a few months ago became the first country to receive a map individually, not in a group, I think is also moving expeditiously. And I hope Bosnia will fulfill the conditions for securing its map by September. And also, after 2012, other countries may surprise many people by applying for membership. So NATO enlargement is certainly not dead. The NATO-EU relationship, many people have discussed this. Senor Lopez Asturias has said the U.S. doesn't need to be afraid of CSDP. On the contrary, I literally, except for the extreme right-wing fringe in my country, I know nobody who wants anything but a stronger EU. We need a stronger European partner. And I have to, in this to be specific, I would have to reinforce what Prime Minister Taci said earlier this morning. In the days of the CFSP, in February of 2008, the CFSP was a 20-7 vote. It's now up to 22-5 with regard to Kosovo. This is not obviously common, and I would hope after the International Court of Justice passes its judgment, I hope later this month, that we can get this to 27-0. There can always be better coordination in this regard. We've come a long way since 1999. I remember that year vividly, dueling communiques, the Washington NATO summit followed by the EU Cologne Ministerio, followed by the EU Helsinki summit communique. We've come a long way since that. We worked out Berlin Plus. I think things are going well. I would associate myself with the remarks of State Secretary Amon about the partnership. We have a partnership, and I think it's clear what it is. And I might also add that several non-NATO EU members like Sweden, Finland, and Austria participate in a very, very meaningful and helpful way in peacekeeping operations, and I would hope that would continue. Lord Anderson alluded to a continuing problem, which is essentially one 60 years old, the huge gap in military capabilities between the United States and its European allies. This is not getting better, and clearly with the budget cutting that everyone has to do, it will probably get worse. I think it's not a healthy situation, but there we are. I'm going to close with a topic that I don't think has been discussed, believe it or not, at this conference, and that is namely the connection between domestic and foreign policy security. And in this connection, I'd like to address one burning issue, and that is namely the status of Muslims in Europe. The demographers tell us that within 20 years, several Western European cities like Antwerp, Marseille, and Cologne will have Muslim majorities. I think Europe, and I'm not being critical, we all have challenges, but I think Europe simply has to do better at integrating its Muslims and do it quickly. And in that connection, I'd like to close with a few words about two neighbors of Croatia where I've just spent the past week, namely Bosnia-Herzegovina and Montenegro, two countries that are striving to join the major Euro-Atlantic institutions. Bosnia-Herzegovina obviously has well-known divisions along entity and community lines, and it has a crying need for constitutional reform. I hope that after the national elections in October, progress will finally be made. Nonetheless, going back to Sarajevo after an absence of several years, I was struck not only by the physical reconstruction, which is most impressive, but even more so by the remarkable human resources in this country. World-class American and Western European educated Bosniak Muslim entrepreneurs, experts, consultants. These people, I think, should be recognized as such in Western Europe, and really, even though there are vast differences between the Bosnian indigenous community and Muslim recent immigrants to Western Europe, nonetheless, you have a built-in role model for Muslims in Western Europe. These people are the most Western I can imagine, the most forward-looking, and I think it's important to recognize that. Montenegro certainly has its share of problems, but I would submit that it's the only country in the region that has fully integrated a sizable Muslim minority population, both Slavic and Albanian, into the country's political, economic, and social life. I could talk at great length about that. As Montenegro receives, as I hope, its EU candidate status very soon, this vitally important achievement should also gain the recognition it deserves. An absolute final word, the United States is a key member of the Euro-Atlantic community, which is not only a community of political and economic interests, but also very much a community of values. And therefore, I hope and expect that we will remain intimately engaged as Europe's partner in meeting the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.